ضبطوا.
What we had long anticipated finally came. Iran had been threatening for a long time that it was going to bomb and attack the state of Israel, that it was going to send a volley of missiles like it did back in April. But there's two very stark differences. Firstly, back in April, we saw a very effective coalition. Israel, the United States, Britain, the French, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and others who were who worked together and were effective in shooting down 99% of those missiles. In contrast, what happened last evening was that there were 180 long-range ballistic missiles that were fired into Israel or at Israel. Some of them did land and did strike inside, thankfully not with casualties or any severe damages, but there were some wounded. But there is a difference here. They were more successful, and this just goes to show that when you're playing a game of trying to shoot down missiles out of the sky, it's never going to be completely 100% successful. And if this continues to escalate, this is going to be obviously an issue for the state of Israel to be able to continue to provide that same level of security that it was able to provide back in April. But the real question now is, what does Israel do? And how does it retaliate? Because the lesson that the Iranians have learned, I think, from the last year, as we come up on the first year anniversary of October 7 and this war that has really embroiled the entire Middle East, is that they can do this with impunity and they have immunity. And they kind of learned that in April when they attacked with 300 cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones. Israel just struck back and took out a component of an S-300 surface-to-air missile defense system, some sort piece of their radar, but kind of showed we can infiltrate your airspace. Nice, but that was not the lesson that was going to get the Iranians to change and recalculate. And if they are not made to pay a price now, then they will continue to do this again. I think there's a consensus from what I'm hearing from different sources that there needs to be some sort of response, right? In an ideal world, the response would actually not even be Israeli. The response would come from the Americans, who, let's remember, the Americans, President Biden, Vice President Harris, everyone has said to the Iranians, don't, right? That they love to use that word, don't. Don't attack, don't escalate. But the Iranians here don't, and then they do, right? So it's not effective. We've also heard that there would be consequences. We've heard that from Secretary of Defense Austin, from the National Security Advisor Sullivan. But in the end, there are no consequences so far. So American power, which I think is important for this region and is important for the security and stability of this region, this is an opportunity to finally show some of that power and to project that power throughout the region and around the world. The Iranians don't understand just rhetoric. They need to feel pressure, and they need to feel that there is a credible military threat that they face. And at the moment, they do not face that. Now, you could say, however, that Israel has the ability to strike, and that is true. Israel proved also earlier this week that it can strike far away in places like Yemen. For the second time, it destroyed Houthi targets there after more missiles were fired toward Tel Aviv from Yemen by another Iranian proxy. That puts Yemen as just a little even more of the distance away from Israel than Iran would be. So Israeli jets can reach Iran. But the Iranians feel that they have created a deterrence against Israel, A, with their successful missile attacks, B, with the proxies and the belt of fire that they have created along Israel's borders. And let's not forget, as much as Hezbollah has been weakened in the last couple of weeks with Israeli attacks against Hezbollah, they still have plenty of rockets. And just this morning, they fired off a volley of dozens of rockets deep into Israel, already inching up again into the Haifa area. So it starts to get complicated, but I think that price has to be exacted from Iran, they have to be made to feel that they cannot get away with this.
At the same time as the Iran attack, we also had this horrific terror attack in Tel Aviv. Just tell us what the latest is on that.
So these were two Palestinian youths who came from Hebron, a large Palestinian city where it's known that Hamas in the West Bank has a significant presence. They somehow came into Israel. They somehow had got their hands on a weapon. I'm presuming that they were able to smuggle it in from Hebron and brought it with them. They boarded the light rail in Tel Aviv in a area that's known as Jaffa. It's a mixed neighborhood and part of the city where you have Israeli Jews as well as Israeli Arabs who live there. Very beautiful part of the city, as people know who have been there. And they started shooting on the light rail. They then got off the light rail and started shooting people just on the sidewalks and on the streets. Tragically, a number of people were killed. Initially, the number had it at 8, then it went down to 6. I heard now that it's back up to 7. It is a true tragedy. I think what it shows, David, is how Israel today, and this is a conclusion that I've started to come to, is really the most attacked country in the world. Now, we could argue, and there's always going to be legitimate criticism of the way Israel prosecutes its wars and the way it might attack a specific target. But at the end of the day, when you look, for example, at other countries that are attacked, so if we take Ukraine as an example, it's at war with a very large enemy called Russia, but that's one enemy. Israel has 6 active fronts all the time. There are the Houthis in Yemen. There's Hezbollah in Lebanon. There's Hamas in Islamic Jihad in Gaza. There are Hamas terrorists in the West Bank, and we saw what happens in Tel Aviv, Jaffa just last night. There is Iran itself, which is attacking Israel, as we saw also last night. And there's, of course, Iranian militias in places like Iraq and Syria, which are also using their missiles to attack Israel. That is 6 active fronts all at the same time. There's no country in the world that is under attack like this all the time. Hezbollah is now the main focus of the IDF, of the Israel Defense Forces. And this comes because as Israel was able to wind down and pretty much complete the large lift or the heavy lifting of the operation in Gaza, it now is able to kind of shift gears and start to focus on what it had neglected for 11 months when it allowed Hezbollah to turn northern Israel into a target range and had to evacuate 60 to 65,000 people from its borderline communities who are still not able to go home because of the continued attacks by Hezbollah. Israel goes into southern Lebanon, wants to clear out those villages of the Hezbollah infrastructure. We saw some images and some of the weaponry that Israel has already found inside tunnels that some of them go down 25, 30, 40 meters just up along the border with sophisticated weapons, anti-tank weapons, heavy machine guns, mortars, roadside bombs, IEDs, improvised explosive devices. This is a very sophisticated army that Hezbollah has built there. Lots of his forces have fled southern Lebanon, but there still are, and there is going to be fighting, and there is fighting that's already been taking place there between the IDF and Hezbollah forces. And this is something that's going to take time. Now, Israel has said, though, that it wants this to be a limited and very focused operation. There's no intention at the moment by the IDF to go further north into Lebanon. I don't think we're going to see Israeli tanks rolling into places like Beirut or Tyre. But at the same time, Israel wants to be able to clear out the south of that country so that its residents can go home. And I just want to point out to our viewers and listeners, you often hear about a 10-kilometer range, and people talk about this river called the Litani River, that Israel wants to clear out the area south of the Litani River. And the reason that Israel talks about the Litani River is very simple. It's very technical. It's because Hezbollah has anti-tank missiles that have about a 10-kilometer range. So if they are within that 10-kilometer radius, they can continue to shoot into Israeli towns as they have been doing. If they are further north of that 10-kilometer range, then those anti-tank weapons are no longer going to be a direct threat to the Israeli communities. Now, this is, of course, all on the assumption that this can work, that Hezbollah can be pushed away, that it can be cleared out, that there can be effective mechanisms, whether it's the Lebanese Armed Forces itself, the LAF, the official military of the country Lebanon, or some other multinational force UNIFIL now 3.0, not just 2.0 like we saw after the Second Lebanon War in 2006, which has been completely ineffective. I don't know, and I don't have great confidence that this will work. Unfortunately, the lesson of the attack that we experienced a year ago on October 7th from Hamas showed us that when we have an enemy that is along our borders, it doesn't just, become nice and good and suddenly love us. It festers, it grows until the one day when it can explode into our country.